Hey guys, tonight we step into the steaming, vine-laced cradle of ancient Java, where tropical winds stir incense from ruined shrines and 100 stone faces stare straight into the breath of volcanoes. Cicadas buzz like electric wires, and temple towers rise like puzzle pieces dropped from the stars. But there's something eerie about how perfectly they line up, not with roads or rivers, but with mountain peaks that belch smoke and burn villages every few decades. You didn't pack sunscreen, and honestly, it wouldn't help anyway, not when the sun is molten and half the land feels like it's exhaling fire. You probably won't survive this, historically, that is. Most civilizations that built this close to volcanoes didn't exactly earn longevity badges. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing which time zones are trying to fall asleep to tales of volcanic doom. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin at nightfall, of course. The best stories always do. The air is dense, the sky somewhere between lavender and charcoal, and the smell of damp stone clings to your clothes like a secret. You're in central Java, where volcanoes rise like ancient gods and temples seem to crawl out of the earth, already half-draped in moss. You're not standing on modern pavement, mind you. You're barefoot on warm volcanic soil, stepping past banana leaves and the occasional startled frog. This isn't just geography, it's memory wrapped in heat and shadow. A few kilometers ahead, Borobudur looms. Not gleams, looms. Unlike glitzy cathedrals or gleaming pyramids, Borobudur doesn't dazzle. It waits. It broods. You feel it long before you see it, because that's how Javanese temples work. They're less about domination and more about calibration. Built not to shout at the sky, but to murmur in harmony with it. You've read that it's a Buddhist monument. You've seen the drone shots. But nothing prepares you for how it breathes. The rhythm of its terraces, the flow of its reliefs, they feel like echoes of something older than belief. And above it all, straight in its line of sight, Mount Merapi puffs a lazy strand of smoke into the twilight. Coincidence? That's what you thought before stepping foot here. Now you're not so sure. Historians still argue whether the Javanese chose temple locations because of the volcanoes, or if they retrofitted meaning onto mountains already sacred. But as you trudge up a slope slick with moss, something clicks. You're not just climbing a hill. You're tracing a path someone drew 1,000 years ago, using stars, ash, and a whisper from the gods. You pause and breathe in that whisper. It smells like damp stone and frangipani blossoms. The birds have quieted. Only a soft rustle of wind through tall grasses remains. You glance west, sunset's final kiss glowing red-orange across the rice paddies, and then back to the horizon, where the silhouette of another volcano, Mount Sumbing, rises like a sleeping beast. It aligns eerily with one of Borobudur's cardinal axes. And here's the kicker, those axes? They aren't random. They don't just face east for the sunrise or line up with the equator out sheer luck. Many of them point, deliberately, to the smoking mouths of surrounding volcanoes. Historians call this sacred geography. Locals just nod like it's obvious. Of course the temples face the mountains. What else would they honor? There's a fringe theory you hear about as you sip warm tea later that evening, sitting cross-legged near an elder guide. He tells you some believe the original builders could sense magnetic energy, ley lines, spiritual veins, call it what you will, that pulse between volcano and stone, heaven and earth. You smile politely, because you've read the science blogs that roll their eyes at such things. But the smile fades as your fingers trail the edge of a carved lotus, its symmetry so precise, it could rival an engineer's blueprint. You wonder, even if it's not science, isn't it something? The frogs start again. The stars blink on. And from your spot near the temple base, you hear a soft, deep rumble. Not thunder. Not a train. Merapi, reminding you it's still alive. You lie back in the grass, temples behind you, volcano ahead, and suddenly you realize, this isn't just a location. It's a conversation across time. Between stonecutters and fire gods. Between monks and magma. Between you, and whatever force made humans align entire mountains of brick just to face another mountain. You wake early, not because of an alarm but because the sky pulls you up. A soft pre-dawn chill wraps around your shoulders as you make your way through the jungle that hides as much as it reveals. The light isn't quite here yet, but the world is already humming. You hear it in the rustling palms, in the distant splash of a heron lifting from a pond, and especially in the patient, eternal exhale of the mountains. Because here in Java, volcanoes don't just sit, they loom, breathe, and sometimes whisper things you don't want to understand. Your path clears onto a ridge, and there they are. The volcanoes. More than you remembered from the maps. Merapi to the north, always smoking like it's got opinions. Merbabu, the elegant twin beside it, cloaked in a little more mist, a little more mystery. Then there's Sumbing and Sindoro, standing off like quiet uncles at a family reunion. But you don't need a family tree to know these peaks mattered. Every angle of your view has an ancient temple somewhere at its feet, staring up at the sky like a loyal subject. You're not imagining it. Historians confirm that Java's volcanic chain wasn't just background scenery, it was the main event. Many ancient temples were built within visual or spiritual range of these peaks. The Javanese called them gunung, and gunung were not just tall, they were cosmic. Mountains connected heaven and earth. Gods lived up there. Spirits danced down their slopes. Eruptions weren't natural disasters, they were divine messages, sometimes tantrums. You step onto a mossy stone platform, once part of a now broken temple. Its remaining wall frames Merapi perfectly, like some sort of medieval IMAX screen. That's when it hits you. The alignment isn't just about physical geography. It's theater. The whole landscape was choreographed. These temples didn't just worship gods, they staged performances with the volcanoes as actors. The Javanese kingdoms, especially during the Salandra and Mataram periods, were masters of this sacred drama. They didn't separate religion from geology. You build a temple, you orient it towards something meaningful, and in Java, that usually meant a volcano. Not because it was pretty, because it was powerful. Because it reminded you that everything could be taken away in a moment. There's one curious detail scholars always mention, almost like a footnote. While many temples face east, toward the rising sun, a fairly common spiritual move across the ancient world, some in Java are aligned diagonally, even seemingly awkwardly, until you check what's in their line of sight. Sure enough, volcano. You walk a little farther and think of how modern cities develop. You picture zoning boards, traffic maps, coffee shop density charts. Now imagine your main planning concern is, how do we align this sanctuary so it can bow to a mountain that might explode next week? That's the kind of stress ancient architects dealt with. Somehow, they didn't just survive it, they wove it into the stone. Here's a weird fact you'll love. Javanese inscriptions from the 9th century sometimes mention the placement of a temple as being guided by the direction of the breath of the mountain. The breath. Not the fire, not the smoke, the breath. Like the mountain is alive, exhaling spirit into the land. Which might be poetic, or a subtle nod to how they used wind patterns and thermal shifts to choose the most auspicious alignments. Historians still argue whether this poetic language masks an early form of proto-meteorology. You crouch to feel the stone beneath your hand. Volcanic rock, of course. Almost every temple here was built from lava's leftovers. Merapi destroys, and Merapi provides. You can't help but think that's the entire philosophy encoded in this alignment. Build from what might kill you. Worship what can erase you. Center your civilization around uncertainty, and call it sacred. A breeze lifts your hair, cool and earthy. It's coming straight from the volcano. You smile. There's that breath again. Later, at a roadside warung, a local guide named Waira tells you his grandfather claimed the temples could calm the volcanoes. Not by magic, but by respect. If you face the mountain, he says, it knows you see it. So it watches back more gently. Fringe? Probably. But when you're sitting in the shadow of a peak that's erupted 70 times in 500 years, you don't mock the local logic. You drink your kopi tubrik and nod solemnly, because something about it makes sense deep in your gut. That's when you realize, these alignments weren't just spiritual or symbolic. They were relational. A pact between the people and the peaks. A constant act of facing the fire and saying, we see you. We honor you. Please, not today. You continue down a soft earthen path that feels less like a trail and more like a forgotten artery of something ancient. The sun is climbing now, dragging golden heat behind it, and somewhere ahead, the ground changes. You don't notice it at first, not until your sandals scuff against a sudden patch of black gravel. Volcanic, clearly. Still warm, somehow. And that scent, like rain on charcoal mixed with damp roots, it fills your lungs in a way that makes you feel both alert and oddly at peace. It's Merapi. Again. Still breathing, still present. Mount Merapi isn't just any volcano. It's the volcano. Java's most active, most sacred, and arguably the most temperamental. It erupts roughly every 5 to 10 years, but don't worry, it's considerate enough to rumble before it explodes. Locals even have terms for its moods. When Merapi is Batuk, they say it's coughing, just a warning. When it's Mara, it's angry. And if it's Diam, silent, that's when you run. Because quiet is what it does before it screams. You arrive at a lookout point, and there she is, Merapi, veiled in morning mist, her slopes painted in layers of green and ash. The plume rising from her summit is soft today, like a slow exhale. You stare for a long moment, feeling ridiculously small and slightly reverent, like you're intruding on someone else's conversation. Then something clicks. You look down the ridge. You trace a line in your mind, from here to Borobudur, and then farther, to Candi Palwan and Candi Mendit, two smaller temples nearby. They form a perfect path. Not along the road, not between rivers, but pointing straight at the volcano. This isn't a fluke. It's one of the clearest examples of sacred alignment in Java. 3 temples, arranged like beads on a thread, all pointing toward Merapi's breath. Historians have long debated why these 3 were positioned this way. A spiritual pilgrimage route? A symbolic alignment for rituals? Or were they measuring something? Scholars still argue whether these spatial arrangements reflect astronomical calendars or volcanic cycles, or some hybrid belief system we no longer fully grasp. What we do know is this: Borobudur was built not just to exist, but to point. The temple itself is a mandala in 3 dimensions, each level representing a different realm of existence, rising from the base of desire up to the dome of enlightenment. And at the very top, you guessed it, that final stupa? It faces Merapi like an eye unblinking. A local legend Waira tells you, between bites of sticky rice wrapped in banana leaf, says that Merapi is the seat of the gods, and the temples are their mirrors. When Merapi speaks, he says, the stone listens. You grin, but you're also half convinced. You walk farther, to Candi Palwan. It's modest, quiet, easy to miss. But its orientation is just as precise. You stand in its center, peer through the doorway, and yes, Merapi sits perfectly in frame. Like someone carved the mountain just to complete the view. Here's a strange tidbit you pick up from a nearby display board. Some archaeologists believe these temples were built with specific eruption cycles in mind. As if their placements were less about fear and more about honoring the volcano's role in fertilizing the land. Volcanic ash, after all, turns the soil here into a lush green miracle every rainy season. So maybe it wasn't just about appeasement. Maybe it was gratitude. But then again, gratitude has layers. There's always a tiny pulse of dread beneath it. Like petting a lion and hoping it doesn't notice how soft your throat is. You reach Candi Mendit, the final point on this sacred path. Inside, there's a massive Buddha seated in the earth-touching gesture, his fingers pointing downward, reminding the world that enlightenment isn't up there in the clouds. It's here! Grounded. Rooted. Facing Merapi. There's something grounding about that, too. You realize these alignments aren't just to honor the volcano. They're meant to remind you where you are. And what you are. You are a dot on a map, a breath in the wind, a passing shadow in the Valley of Giants. You lean against the stone wall of the temple, which hums faintly with heat absorbed from the rising sun. You look again to the volcano. Not to analyze it. Not even to fear it. Just to say, silently, I see you. And whether you believe it or not, it feels like it sees you too. The day stretches into late morning as you wander back toward the base of Borobudur, the shadows now shorter, the air thick with the kind of heat that makes your shirt cling and your thoughts slow. You're not complaining though. Somehow, the weight of it all feels appropriate. As if the sun itself is pressing you into the earth to remind you where you came from. Ash to ash, stone to stone. Volcano to temple. You stop in front of the eastern staircase, the one tourists crowd every sunrise, and begin a slow climb. The stairs are steep, deliberately so. Not for the convenience of modern visitors with cameras, but for pilgrims. You're supposed to work for the view. And oh, what view it becomes! Each level of Borobudur unfolds like a revelation. First, the reliefs, intricate carvings depicting scenes from the Buddha's life, mythological epics, and moral tales, some funny, some heartbreaking, and all timeless. You spot one panel showing a monkey offering fruit to a monk. Another shows a merchant weighed down by greed. Somewhere in between, a royal figure kneels before a mountain, your eyes narrow. Could that be Merapi, rendered in careful stone curve? Maybe. Maybe not. Historians still argue whether some reliefs are symbolic volcanoes or just stylized hills. But to you, the resemblance burns clear. You ascend another level. The air grows thinner, or maybe that's your anticipation. This isn't just a climb, it's a calibration. Every layer of this temple was designed to move you physically and spiritually, closer to, what? Enlightenment? The gods? The volcano? Maybe all of them. You stop at the edge of a terrace and turn your body east. The sun is well above the horizon now, but you still catch its slanting rays highlighting the symmetrical rows of bell-shaped stupas. Each one sits like a chess piece in a cosmic game only the ancients knew how to play. And directly behind them, rising like destiny itself, is Merapi. It's no accident. Borobudur's entire orientation subtly leans toward this sacred axis. It doesn't point to the exact north-south line, as you'd expect from such a precise structure. Instead, its layout aligns more closely with the path of the sun and the breath of the volcano. That's right, the temple is just slightly askew, tilted like a face turning to listen. You touch the warm stone, your fingers tracing centuries of ritual polish. There's no plaque here, no blinking sign that says, "This monument faces a volcano, please be amazed." But that's part of the genius. The Javanese didn't build this place to show off. They built it to mean something. Quirky fact incoming, early Dutch explorers thought Borobudur was just a random pile of rocks when they stumbled upon it in the 1800s. They actually debated whether it was a temple at all. Some thought it might be a fortress. One guy even suggested it was a giant game board for the gods. It took years of excavation and even more years of humility before scholars began to grasp the cosmic choreography at play here. You make your way to the very top, the central dome. From here, the world falls away. Green valleys stretch out like a patchwork quilt, stitched together by rivers, rice paddies, and, always, the mountains. You see Merapi, of course, but beyond it, if the haze is light, you glimpse Merbabu, Sumbing, and Sindoro, each one in silent dialogue with the stone lotus beneath your feet. This isn't just geography. It's geometry. Sacred geometry. There's a theory, a deliciously debated one, that the ancient Javanese used a system of Nalasangha, or 9 sacred directions, to plan their temples. North, south, east, west, yes, but also the diagonals, and the center. Each direction held meaning, corresponded with a deity, an element, even a part of the human body. Borobudur? It occupies the center. The still point in the spinning world. And from that still point, every direction leads to fire. You sit cross-legged now, letting your breath slow to match the pace of the pass. Around you, tourists murmur, birds dive overhead, and the sun beats down, but none of it matters. You're in the center of something bigger than architecture, older than belief. A mountain of stone facing a mountain of flame. You think of the builders, thousands of them, carving, hauling, aligning. Not with machines, but with math and faith. Imagine aligning each level so precisely without modern instruments. And yet, they did it. With bamboo scaffolds, yes, but also with an instinct tuned to the pulse of the land. You wonder if they knew Merapi would still be watching 1,000 years later. Still breathing. Still burning. Still waiting for someone, maybe you, to climb this high and understand, this was never just a monument. It's a compass, a conversation, a psalm. And now, you're part of it. You descend from Borobudur's summit, and though gravity does most of the work, your mind feels heavier now. Not burdened, but pulled, like something ancient just reached inside you and said, "Remember me." You walk slowly, because rushing after something like that feels rude. The stone steps are uneven, smoothed by centuries of feet. Some monks. Some merchants. Some, maybe, not so different from you. At the base, the jungle reclaims the edges of the clearing. Vines coil around the stones, not with aggression but with familiarity. You get the sense they were here during construction, quiet witnesses. And maybe they helped carry the whispers between volcano and architect, between stupa and summit. Now you shift focus, not on the temple as a whole, but its math. That's right. You're about to talk sacred numbers, but don't worry, this isn't school. It's art disguised as arithmetic. Take the temple's levels, for instance. 9 total. 6 square platforms on the bottom, 3 circular on top. It's not arbitrary. Those lower platforms? They're said to represent the realm of Kamadhatu, desire, the messiness of human life. The middle levels are Rupadhatu, form, order, the spiritual climb. The top? Aripadhatu, formless, where the ego dissolves. And guess what? Each of those stages was built with precise ratios. Not guessed, measured, down to the angle of sunrise on a solstice. You see, the ancients didn't just build toward the gods. They encoded the climb in every step. Every corridor you walked through was a test of awareness. A meditation in stone. And none of it would make sense unless it pointed, literally and symbolically, towards something more powerful than themselves. Like, say, a volcano. You look again at the central dome. It sits at the top like a punctuation mark. Not a period, but an ellipsis. A question left hanging. And here's the kicker. If you were to draw a line from that dome through the temple's axis and keep going, it would eventually lead, back to Merapi. A subtle, sacred trajectory. Hidden in plain sight. Now for a quirky detail, some scholars believe the builders may have used rudimentary theodolites, simple devices with plumb lines and sighting sticks, to chart these alignments. Others say they watched bird migration, or even meditated in silence until the correct energy flowed. Either way, the precision is astonishing. Modern satellite imaging confirms it. The angles line up. The geometry is intentional. Historians still argue whether these tools were passed down from Indian astronomers or developed locally, but the results speak for themselves. You're standing in a mandala that doubles as a directional tool. Think about that for a second. A place of worship that's also a map. A spiritual labyrinth that also doubles as a compass. And not just to find your way around town, but to orient your soul. That's some next-level urban planning. You wander into a side chamber where the reliefs are more eroded. Humidity does that. Centuries of monsoon. Still, one figure remains clear, a man sitting cross-legged under a tree, eyes closed. You recognize him from earlier panels. He's Siddhartha, pre-enlightenment. But here's what catches your eye. Behind him is a mountain, oddly realistic, smoking faintly. Not symbolic. Not stylized. Just there, like a quiet witness. And suddenly, your guide wire's words come back to you. When the gods sit still, the mountains watch. It's as if the mountain isn't just backdrop, it's a character. Part of the scene. And maybe even a participant. It watches the worshippers, receives their intentions, and stores them like volcanic energy, silent until the moment is right. You step outside again and squint up at the sky. Clouds gathering now. Afternoon brewing. You feel the shift in pressure, and for a wild moment, you imagine the volcano reacting, not erupting, just acknowledging. As if Merapi knows someone noticed the pattern today. Another theory you overhear from a nearby tour group, some believe the temple's design incorporates not just physical direction but temporal alignment too. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. You raise an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. Could the whole structure be a calendar? A clock carved in lava stone? Historians still argue whether these alignments track celestial events or were purely ceremonial. You decide it doesn't matter. Either way, someone did the math. And they did it to point toward fire. You walk a final lap around the temple's lowest platform, where the original base, the Kamadhata level, was once covered by later renovations. Rediscovered centuries later, it revealed hidden panels. Among them, scenes of karma, of punishment, of chaos. The messy part of life. The volcano's reflection in human form. That's the realm we all begin in. The base of the climb. And the only way forward is up. You leave Borobudur behind like someone slowly backing out of a sacred room, not turning your back on it but easing away with a nod, like, thanks for the weird enlightenment and mild sunburn. The path winds east now, toward the rising sun, and toward Prambanan. But before you reach it, something makes you stop. A clearing. No tourists, no gift shops, no signs. Just grass, insects, and the kind of silence that's never truly silent. You kneel, pick up a piece of obsidian half buried in the soil. It's sharp, black, and possibly old. You hold it to the sky, and through its edge, you catch the outline of a distant temple spire. And behind it, as if the earth itself leaned into the shot, a volcano. Coincidence? You laugh. Not anymore. You press forward. The walk to Prambanan takes you through villages where people still sweep their porches with palm fronds and hang offerings of jasmine and banana leaf on small shrines. Volcanoes tower in the background like nosy neighbors. You spot Merapi again, always there, always watching. As you approach the temple complex, it hits you differently than Borobudur did. This one's not round and meditative. It's sharp, vertical, all soaring ambition and sacred geometry, like the stone itself is trying to pierce the sky. Prambanan is Hindu, not Buddhist. Dedicated to Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. And you can tell, there's more drama in these stones. More posture. Less introspection, more presence. You step through the main gate, and the sound changes. Your footsteps echo. Your breath gets smaller. The central spire of Kandi Shiva rises above you like a dagger of devotion, and you realize, it, too, aligns. Not just with sunrise or sunset, but again, with Merapi. Here's a fun twist. During the 9th century, this region wasn't just religious, it was competitive. The ruling dynasties were flexing their cosmic muscles. The Sailendra were Buddhist, hence Borobudur. The Sanjaya were Hindu, hence Prambanan. And what did both sides have in common? A deep need to point their biggest, boldest monuments toward the very same volcano. That's not politics. That's reverence on a tectonic scale. You honor the outer ring, where lesser temples, each dedicated to mythical creatures or divine mounts, form an orbit. It's a layout designed for more than symmetry. It funnels your attention inward and upward, toward Shiva's tower. And, again, beyond it, volcano. You stand in the shadow of the main spire, gaze upward, and feel filtered. Like your presence has passed through layers of intent, stone, sun, fire, and God, and now something else is looking back. There's a belief, still held by some Javanese spiritualists, that sunrise at Prambanan is no ordinary event. They say the light passes through the temple's axis in a way that activates its nerve. That's the word they use, saraf. As if the whole complex is a sleeping body, and the sun is its breath. Historians still argue whether this is rooted in scriptural evidence or later cultural layering. But it doesn't feel random. It feels designed. You walk into the chamber housing the statue of Shiva. It's darker here, cooler. The god stands poised, calm yet commanding. Around him, carvings tell the story of cosmic cycles, creation, preservation, destruction. The big three. You touch the wall, and again you feel that low thrum, like the temple is gently vibrating with the breath of something older than stone. Now, for a fringe theory Wyra once told you over grilled satay, some believe that when the temple's peak aligns with the volcano's silhouette at certain angles during the year, it opens an energetic channel. A line of spiritual voltage, if you will. One that can charge prayers or download insight from the gods. You smirked when he said it, but now, standing here, the idea doesn't feel so wild. A bit sci-fi monk, sure, but not crazy. Outside, the clouds part just enough to give you a sliver of sun. It slices through the eastern gate, hitting the inner altar with eerie precision. Not quite Indiana Jones, but close. You half expect something to open. Instead, the light just lingers, highlighting a path. You follow it. Not physically. Mentally. You track the line it draws across the landscape. And again, always again, it leads to Merapi. You realize the volcano isn't just background. It's the fixed point on a cosmic compass. The mountain is the needle. The temples, they're the notches. And here's the punchline. Prambanan's alignment isn't just eastward, it's slightly northeast, once again nudged toward Merapi. The builders could have stuck with pure cardinal directions. They didn't. They cheated just a bit. Because that's where the volcano lives. And in Java, the gods don't live in heaven. They live in fire. You step away from Prambanan's looming towers, your skin still humming from the silence of Shiva's chamber, your thoughts echoing with ancient math and the odd feeling that someone, or something, had been watching you back. You're not done. Not by a long shot. Because now you're chasing something even more elusive, the invisible paths that connect these temples. Not roads. Not trade routes. Something stranger. You veer off the beaten tourist path, led by a half-crumpled printout of satellite maps and a rumor Wyra once let slip. There's a straight line, he said. From Merapi to Borobudur. But also to other places. Hidden places. You'd laugh then. Now you're sweating through your shirt and squinting at the horizon, wondering how much truth fits between laughter and lava. You make your way to a lesser-known site, Kandi Sambasari. It's small, sunken into the ground like a secret. rediscovered only in the 1960s after centuries of burial under volcanic ash. Yeah, Merapi again. This little temple isn't flashy, but it's precise. Its entrance faces due west, except it doesn't. Not quite. The angle is tilted ever so slightly north, as if someone wanted it to point to the sunset, but also to Merapi. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or a consequence of terrain. You stand there, arms crossed, aligning yourself with the stone doorway and peering into the distance. And there it is. Just the faintest hint of the volcano's curve on the horizon. A coincidence? You've officially retired that word. You press on, following another lead. The old locals call it Garris Gabe, the invisible line. They say you can walk it barefoot and feel the shift in the air. Some say birds avoid flying across it. Others claim temples along the line have better harvests, clearer dreams, fewer snakes. Fringe? Definitely. But compelling. Armed with a compass app and an open mind, you trace a slow arc between Borobudur, Palwan, Mendit, and now Sambasari. The line keeps aiming toward Merapi like a divining rod. And then you notice it's not just a line, it's a corridor. A spiritual vector. And it's not alone. Because just when you think you're onto the one sacred alignment, another temple ruins that. Literally. You stumble into Kandi Kalasan, another 8th century wonder, its walls now worn but still whispering. And this one? It faces Mount Sumbing. Not Merapi. You scratch your head, confused, until you realize the temple still sits on a wider radial network. A web of axes. Volcanoes as anchors. Temples as tuning forks. This is where it gets wild. Some French researchers believe that if you chart all known temples of Central Java and overlay their alignments, you get a spiral pattern, a kind of energetic whirlpool centered between Merapi and the Southern Sea. Too neat to be true? Maybe. But when you're standing knee-deep in temple grass, with volcanoes on all sides, the pattern starts feeling less like fantasy and more like forgotten logic. You sit down in the shade of a banyan tree, breath-catching, and draw lines in the dirt with a stick. Volcano here. Temple there. Another line. Another peak. You pause and stare at what you've sketched. It looks crude. It looks absurd. But something about it hums. It feels real. Here's the open debate. Were these alignments driven by astronomical events, sunrise angles, solstice shadows, lunar patterns, or by spiritual intuition? Were the builders measuring starlight? Or were they following dreams? No one agrees. Maybe both are true. Maybe the dreamers were the scientists, just speaking in different units. A fly buzzes near your ear. A bird calls somewhere in the canopy. And from far away, you hear it again, that low, almost lazy rumble. Merapi, clearing its throat. You pick up your bag and keep walking. You're not sure where you're headed next, but that's okay. Because here in Central Java, navigation is less about maps and more about listening. To the mountains. To the stone. To the sky. And maybe, if you're quiet enough, to the line beneath your feet. You reach Borobudur again, but this time you don't approach from the grand staircases or the manicured lawns tourists know. You slip in from the side, brushing past tall elephant grass, crunching old gravel underfoot. You're hunting something subtle. Not the grandeur of temples, but the quiet of alignments. Because if the outer geometry is stunning, the inner logic might be even stranger. You duck under a banyan branch and emerge onto the temple's northern base, less photographed, more honest. There's no crowd here. Just you, the stone, and a few chickens doing their best archaeologist impression. You climb the side again, slower this time. Not to reach the top, but to pause at each level and listen. Not for sound, for shape. See, the more you walk Borobudur, the more it reveals. Its symmetry isn't just horizontal, it's vertical. Each level mirrors a cosmic order. But hidden within that order are axes that don't always match the surface layout. Invisible lines that seem to cut through the structure on diagonals. Lines that, once again, if extended, graze the slopes of volcanoes beyond. At level 4, you stop. Something about the space feels off. Not wrong. Just redirected. You find a small niche with a worn Buddha facing northwest. Not toward Merapi, but toward a lesser-known peak, Mount Telemoyo. A lesser volcano. A lesser Buddha. But both present. Both aligned. That's when it clicks. This temple isn't a single compass. It's a whole cluster of them. A compound calibration. Not just a line to a volcano, but a line between them. The entire structure might be reading energy from one direction, then transferring it through its corridors, redirecting it like an ancient circuit board. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or a byproduct of their symbolic architecture. You don't argue. You just feel it. You walk in tight circles now, tracing the upper terraces. Each stupa is identical at first glance, stone bell, seated Buddha, serene face, but stand in just the right spot, and one will frame a volcano perfectly through its lattice. You try it. Stupa 17, northwestern quadrant. You peek in. Boom, Mount Merbabu, distant but centered. That cannot be random. You jot this down, slightly giddy. You're hunting ghosts, sure. But every time you find one, it grins back at you from behind stone. Here's the fringe tidbit that Waira once muttered while half asleep on a bus ride. Some believe Borobudur isn't just aligned with volcanoes, it balances them. As in, it's a stabilizer. A geomantic pressure valve. You laughed. Now, you aren't so sure. Because it does sit nearly equidistant from Merapi, Merbabu, Sumbing, and Sindoro, forming a kind of energetic epicenter. Some Javanese mystics call it the navel of the island. The place where everything breathes from. You try a little experiment. Stand on the northern edge. Breathe in. Now pivot to the southern edge. Breathe out. Something in the air changes. Not drastically. Just enough to make you notice. The theory goes like this. Volcanoes radiate invisible waves. Magnetic, spiritual, or maybe emotional. Who knows? And temples act like tuning forks. Align enough of them properly, and the whole landscape starts humming at a different pitch. Fringe? Maybe. But consider this. People have lived near these volatile peaks for over 1,000 years. Not because they had no choice. Because they saw value in the fire. You descend again, catching glimpses of temple guardians, those fierce little lion-like creatures carved into the base corners. You swear their eyes follow you, but that's probably the sun playing tricks. Probably. Outside, the light has shifted again. The volcano is still there. Watching. Waiting. Unmoved. And Borobudur? It doesn't point at it like a telescope. It receives it. Like a dish. Like an ear. Suddenly the word alignment feels inadequate. This isn't about pointing. It's about communion. Dialogue. You don't just face a volcano. You respond to it. In stone. In silence. In symmetry. You leave Borobudur for the last time that day, sweat-soaked, half sun-drunk, but with a brain that refuses to shut up. You've seen too many alignments now to ignore. Too many precise angles carved into massive stone blocks. Too many temples that just so happen to line up with fire-breathing mountains like it was part of some ancient engineering joke. And so, naturally, you head east again. Next stop? The twin of Merapi, Mount Merbabu. You've seen it before, lurking quietly beside its angry sibling. But now you're going to treat it as more than just a backdrop. You're going to listen to it, same as the others. And as always in Java, when you seek a volcano, you find a temple waiting nearby. You make your way toward the modest ruins of Candicelagrio. It's not flashy. It's not symmetrical. But it's perched, almost stubbornly, on the lower slope of a hill that faces Merbabu so directly, it feels like it's staring down an old rival. The temple's footprint is narrow, and its central chamber houses a small linga, the classic Hindu symbol of divine energy and regeneration. What's interesting is not what the temple contains. It's what it frames. You stand in the center, turn your body, and, surprise, it's aligned not to Merapi, the star of the volcanic show, but to Merbabu, the quieter one. The one most tourists skip over. And you start thinking, maybe this isn't about worshipping the biggest, baddest mountain. Maybe it's about balance. Merapi is chaotic, always on the edge. Merbabu is calm, mostly silent. Yin and yang, lava and mist. You settle on a stone ledge and eat something vaguely banana-shaped that Waira swore was a snack. It's not bad. Sweet, sticky, slightly alarming. As you chew, you remember something. While most people fixate on the dramatic eruptions, farmers in this region love Merbabu more. Why? Its gentle slopes. Its rich ash soil. Its predictability. Historians still argue whether temple builders intentionally paired their shrines to opposing volcanoes. A kind of cosmic duality. But once you start noticing the trend, it's hard to unsee. Borobudur faces Merapi. Selagrio faces Merbabu. And between them? A human story of tension and balance. Here's a quirky note. According to Javanese lore, Merbabu used to be just as fiery as Merapi. But after a great argument between the mountain spirits, yes, volcanoes have personalities here, it went silent. Gave up eruption for introspection. Became the mountain of meditation. You glance up its gentle green ridges and think, yeah, I'd nap on that. You start climbing. Not far. Just enough to gain perspective. The trail is shaded, earthy, surprisingly quiet. Birds flit between branches. Somewhere down the slope, a gamelan tune drifts from a radio in a rice field. You crest a small rise, and boom. The entire valley spreads below. And beyond it? Borobudur. A tiny stone on a green canvas. You realize something wild. From this exact point, you can draw a line to both Borobudur and Merapi. And now you're standing on the third angle. A perfect triangle. A cosmic coordinate. You sit. Because honestly, your knees need a break. But also because triangles matter in Javanese cosmology. Not just because of math, but because they mimic the form of the volcanoes themselves. Base, slope, summit. Creation, life, destruction. The trinity of existence. They even have a word for it, Gunungan. The shape of the mountain. The shape of stories. You trace the triangle with your finger in the air. Borobudur, Merapi, Merbabu. A loop of meaning, each point lending something to the next. Wisdom, fire, peace. And now you're in it. Not outside, observing. Inside. Part of the shape. You close your eyes, feel the breeze lift the sweat from your neck. It carries the scent of grass and sulfur, soft and strange. You breathe it in and think, maybe that's the point. Not to choose between volcanoes, but to see how they relate, how they define each other, how even in the land of fire, calm has its place. You wake to birdsong and a dull ache in your calves, souvenirs from yesterday's mountain flotation. But there's no time to nurse soreness when Java still has temples whispering secrets into the volcanic wind. You hop into a creaky minibus that smells like fried shallots and incense, and head toward your next mystery, Candy Ijo. You haven't heard of it? That's fair. It's the shy cousin of the temple family, tucked away, perched on a lonely hill, always overshadowed by Borobudur and Prambanan. But Candy Ijo has one major flex, its view. And its attitude. The road winds upward, past terraced fields and skeletal trees, until finally it spits you out near the temple steps. The air is thinner here. Not mountain thin. Just above everything thin. You stand, stretch, and look back, and there it is. The volcano again. Merapi. Always. But this time, something's different. Candy Ijo doesn't just face Merapi. It watches it like a rival. Like two old generals in a standoff, stone versus fire, neither blinking. The temple structure is simple, one main building, flanked by several smaller shrines. Modest, but precise. Its orientation, once again, favors a slightly skewed northeast axis, nudged just enough to keep Merapi in frame. Another deliberate alignment. Another nod to the gods of ash and smoke. And here comes your favorite part. There's a local tale, one of those I heard it from my uncle who heard it from a buffalo kind of legends, that claims the king who commissioned Candy Ijo built it not to honor Merapi, but to warn it. As the story goes, the mountain had become too unpredictable. Crops were suffering. Rivers were drying. So the king, tired of building temples in reverence, built one in defiance. Not disrespectful, just firm. Like saying, we see you. We're not afraid. Fringe? Absolutely. But standing here, wind in your ears and fire on the horizon, it doesn't feel entirely fictional. Historians still argue whether Candy Ijo's altitude was chosen for defensive, spiritual, or simply symbolic reasons. After all, it's one of the highest Hindu temples in Java. Almost absurdly perched. From this vantage, you don't just see Merapi, you see everything. Valleys, rivers, distant ridges. It's like the temple is stationed at a divine watchtower. You wander the grounds. The carvings are faint but defiant. You find a lintel with a kalpatru, the tree of life, its roots digging deep, its branches reaching wide. A reminder, perhaps, that even on trembling ground, life insists on growing. Here's a quirky little twist. During a restoration phase in the early 2000s, surveyors found that the temple's secondary structures created shadow patterns on the equinoxes that mimicked the slope of nearby volcanoes. Coincidence? The temple is shouting absolutely not in stone. You sit near the main shrine, feet dangling over a ridge, eyes squinting toward the volcano. It's puffing lazily today, no tantrums. The villagers say that means it's listening. If it's quiet, it's learning your scent, one woman told you yesterday, half joking. You smiled then. Now it lingers. Because it does feel like you're being sniffed at by something massive and invisible. Not threatened. Just notice. You think back to the tale of the king. Was he scared? Or stubborn? Maybe both. Maybe that's what temples like Candy Ijo are about. Not just surrender, but negotiation. You build, you face the mountain, and you say, here's what we offer. Please spare the children. And more often than not, it worked. Candy Ijo isn't as famous, as symmetrical, or as ornately decorated as Borobudur or Prambanan. But its presence? Undeniable. It sits on the edge of things. Not just geographically, but spiritually. It's the temple of thresholds. Of maybe. Of in-betweens. You stand one last time and do a slow turn. Temple behind you. Volcano before you. And in the space between? You. A tiny, sweating human on an ancient stage, reenacting a ritual older than maps. One where fire and faith never stop negotiating. You ride south now, following a hunch in the ridgeline. The villages thin out, replaced by stretches of quiet forest and the occasional roaming goat who absolutely judges your hiking shoes. Your destination is Radaboko, part palace, part temple, part something else entirely. And unlike Borobudur or Prambanan, it doesn't present itself as a clean set of answers. Radaboko is all questions. Perched on a limestone plateau, the ruins sprawl lazily, like a cat stretching in the sun. No towering shrines. No intricate spires. Just broad stone gates, collapsed walls, meditation caves, and the unmistakable feeling that someone very important once stood here with a very serious look on their face. You walk through the central gate, framed by weathered columns that still manage to look regal, and pause. Ahead lies a wide stone courtyard. But it's the background that snatches your attention. There it is again, Merapi. Not front and center this time. Slightly off-axis. Watching from a distance, as if testing whether you'd notice it lurking behind the ruins. But it's not alone. Because to the east, past the remaining walls and terraces, Mount Merbabu balances the view. Two volcanoes. Two silent sentinels. Radaboko doesn't face either directly, but it sits between them. That matters. Oh, it matters a lot. Here's where things get spicy. Some archaeologists believe Radaboko wasn't just a palace. It was a ritual complex. A liminal zone. A place where political power and spiritual energy overlapped, like the world's most intense yoga studio. Historians still argue whether it was a royal retreat, a defensive post, or a site for initiation rites involving fire, fasting, and maybe the occasional prophetic mushroom. You sit on a stone bench near the cremation platform, yes, that kind of palace, and take it all in. The twin volcanoes, the open sky, the eerie stillness. The alignment doesn't shout. It hums. Whispering geometry. A local legend floats your way from a soft-spoken caretaker with callous hands and infinite time. He tells of a love triangle. Between Shiva, the destroyer god, Dewi Durga, his fierce consort, and Vishnu, the preserver. According to the tale, the temples of Prambanan, Radaboko, and a now-vanished site formed a celestial triangle reflecting this cosmic drama. Prambanan, devoted to Shiva. Radaboko, a seat of Durga. The third? Lost, but said to face Vishnu. And wouldn't you know it, each point of this triangle faces a different volcano. Coincidence is officially fired. You wander to the edge of the plateau where a meditation cave is carved into the hill. The air changes as you step inside, cool, damp, and oddly sweet. You light a candle from the offering table and sit. The cave frames Merapi perfectly in the distance. A volcanic window. You breathe, slowly. The flame flickers. The mountain does not. And here's the fringe theory of the day. Some believe these three sites, Prambanan, Radaboko, and the missing third, were part of a larger geomantic circuit, used not just for prayer but for maintaining cosmic equilibrium across the land. Like plugging in giant batteries made of lava and limestone to keep the universe from short-circuiting. Wild? Maybe. But when you're sitting in a 1,000-year-old cave staring through volcanic silence, it feels like less of a stretch. Outside, the clouds shift. For a moment, sunlight cuts across the valley like a golden wire, drawing a line from Radaboko to Prambanan. And for that single second, you see it. The alignment. The geometry of myth. You step back into the light, blinking. The mountain smokes in the distance. Not angry. Just present. And Radaboko? It stays still. A stone exhale between fire and sky. You descend from Radaboko with that same odd feeling you always get after visiting these places, like you've left something behind, or picked something up, and can't tell which is which. The path is rough, scattered with loose pebbles and long shadows. Your legs are tired, but your brain? On fire. Because now you've heard it from 2 different guides in 2 different villages, the sacred straight line. A line, they say, that connects 3 massive temples, Borobudur, Mendit, and Prambanan. But that's not all. Extend that line further, and it continues to cross volcanoes. Not around them. Through them. Like an arrow that forgot to stop. It's not a tourist route. It's not on the maps. But once you start looking, it's impossible not to see. You ride in the back of a pickup truck full of jackfruit and woven baskets, bouncing toward a small hill that local farmers simply call the marker. It's unassuming. No temple. No shrine. Just a clearing with a view. But from here, something wild happens. You pull out your phone, not to text, but to use the compass. You sight along the hill's crest, and sure enough, you see the 3 temples fall into line like stars in an ancient constellation. Borobudur to the west, Mendit in the center, and Prambanan to the east. All sitting on what would, if drawn out, slice across the belly of central Java like a cosmic incision. Historians still argue whether this line was intentional or the luckiest accident in Southeast Asian history. Some insist the temples were constructed independently, each responding to local terrain, politics, or religious needs. But the angles, those cruelly perfect angles, suggest something else. Coordination. Intention. Maybe even obsession. Here's where it gets weirder. Some researchers, mostly the French variety, the ones who wear lots of linen and talk to crystals, believe the line isn't just straight. It's active. They call it the dragon vein, borrowing from Chinese feng shui. A pulse of earth energy running through Java, tapped by temple builders like ancient electricians. You'd roll your eyes, except, well, it's also aligned. You find yourself tracing it on your map. From Borobudur to Mendit to Prambanan. Then beyond, to Kandiijo, to Radaboko, to places where the jungle swallowed temples whole and the names have been forgotten. And if you stretch it even further, you reach Mount Lao in the east and Mount Sumbing in the west. 2 more volcanoes. 2 more silent guardians. You sit on the grass and let the wind do what it does, carry the heat of ash and the smell of clove cigarettes from a nearby field. You picture the ancient builders, barefoot, chalk in hand, drawing lines in the dirt. Not for roads. For revelation. A quirky note you overheard in a roadside warung. Some locals say the line was once used by spirits as a migration route. Marika Jalan Malam, the old man told you. They walk at night. When the moon rises, the souls of old kings, monks, and mountain gods follow that path from temple to temple. Seeking balance. Checking on the volcanoes. Making sure we haven't screwed it all up too badly. You can't confirm this. But that night, when the moon is out and the trees sway like slow dancers, you walk part of that path. Alone. Between Mendit and Pawan. It's quiet. The stars above form their own kind of grid. And even though you know better, you swear you hear footsteps just ahead. Not threatening. Just present. You stop. The air hums. And in the distance, framed between 2 tree trunks, you see Merapi again. Glowing faintly, smoke curling into a question mark. The sacred straight line isn't just a line. It's a sentence. A message. And like all great messages, it's up to you to decide what it means. You wake up in a different rhythm now. No more hotel alarms or guidebook schedules. Just the slow light of dawn brushing against the wooden shutters of a homestay deep in Magelang, and the faint sound of roosters negotiating territory. You sip black coffee so strong it could file your teeth, and stare at a hand-drawn map given to you by an elderly woman who insisted you call her Bud, Auntie, though she's no relation. She circled 3 places. Small shrines. Names you didn't recognize. Temples nobody visits, she said. But they're real. And off you go. The first one, Candy Nawan, sits awkwardly behind a schoolyard. Children play soccer 20 feet from its moss-covered base. It's small, 5 stubby towers of stone, their carvings, almost worn away by time and rain. But its doorway faces northwest. And guess what lines up on that axis? Mount Sumbing. Coincidences ban now, remember? You sit beside the smallest tower and pull out your compass. Not because you doubt the direction, but because you want to feel it. The needle quivers, settles, points. And there, behind a cluster of coconut palms, you catch it, just the faint blue curve of the mountain's shoulder. It's like the temple is whispering across the fields. I still see you. You move on. Candy Gunung is next. It's a tougher hike, tucked into a hillside with barely any signage and 0 vending machines. You half expect to find it overgrown or gone. But it's there. Quiet. Tired, but intact. One central chamber. A linga inside. And once again, when you step outside and trace the line of its door, Mount Merapi. Historians still argue whether these small temples were part of a deliberate regional alignment or just independent acts of devotion. You've stopped arguing. They're connected. Maybe not by blueprint, but by instinct. Like musicians who never met playing the same haunting tune across 1,000 years. And now, the final one, Candy Abang. Oh, Candy Abang. It's not even stone anymore. It's a mound. A literal green hill shaped like a dome, with a narrow staircase carved into its side and not a single brick in sight. You'd think it was just a weird grassy bump if someone hadn't told you it was once a temple, buried under centuries of erosion, ash, and story. You climb it slowly. The grass waves around your legs. At the top, there's no statue, no shrine. Just wind. And silence. And that same volcano, Merapi, looming once again in perfect alignment. You sit in the middle of the hilltop and close your eyes. And that's when it happens. You feel it. A hum. Not in your ears, but in your ribs. A kind of gentle pressure. Like something beneath you is holding its breath. You open your eyes and look around. Nothing moves, except the grass. But the feeling remains. A presence. Not ghostly. Just awake. Here's a quirky belief from the locals. Candy Abang is said to be a womb temple. A sacred feminine site. The place where the earth cradles memory. Unlike the towering male shrines meant to reach the sky, this one sinks gently into the earth, holding space. Not declaring. Just being. You lie back in the grass and let your arms flop out to the sides. The sky above is a pure, cloudless blue. The volcano ahead steams faintly. You wonder, did the builders know it would one day disappear? That grass would reclaim it? Maybe that was the plan. You think of all the temples you've visited. The famous ones. The hidden ones. The forgotten ones. And you realize, this is what alignment means. Not just lines and angles. But attention. Quiet, steady attention paid to things larger than yourself. Each small temple is a whisper. And together, they make a song. The next morning, you find yourself ankle-deep in fine gray dust. Not the soft kind that clings politely. This is gritty, volcanic, sneaky stuff that slides into your socks and settles into every crease of your backpack. You're not at a temple. Not yet. You're at the edge of a lava field. It's the aftermath of Merapi's 2010 eruption. Trees, once proud and leafy, stand like charred matchsticks. The landscape rolls out like a forgotten battlefield, silence heavy and defiant. You walk carefully, because here the land is fragile in a strange way, burned raw, yet pulsing with life just below the surface. This is where the cycle turns. Where temples don't just face volcanoes, they respond to them. Because sometimes, the volcano doesn't whisper. It roars. And when it does, stone breaks, walls collapse, but stories adapt. You make your way to Candy Kegelan, a temple that was literally buried by an eruption. Not last century. Many centuries ago. It wasn't rediscovered until 1993, during construction of a sugarcane field. Workers hit something solid. Turned out to be history. Now, parts of the temple have been excavated. The structure rises slowly, still half submerged. But its alignment? Still perfect. Still pointing toward Merapi. Even after centuries underground. You kneel by one of the half-buried Yoni sets and just stare. At the angle. At the precision. At the audacity of it all. Historians still argue whether these buried temples were meant to be forgotten or protected. Did the builders know the mountain would reclaim them? Was burial an accident, or a form of preservation? You run your fingers along the edge of a lava-scorched base stone and wonder if it matters. Because the temple's still here. Still listening. Then you visit Kandisari, an upper temple, higher ground, spared from Merapi's worst tantrums. It's simpler now. Just walls, a few panels, faint impressions of deities whose names no longer matter. But it's survived. And people still light incense here. Still leave flowers. Still look up toward the mountain and say thank you. Or maybe just, we're still here. You notice a strange pattern across these sites. The ones hit hardest by eruptions are also the ones where restoration is most devoted. Like the disaster itself reawakens their value. Like Merapi's fury becomes a reminder, these are not museum pieces. These are relationships. When one side screams, the other rebuilds. Not out of obligation. Out of love. And here's your quirky fact for the day. During major eruptions, local villagers often carry sacred heirlooms from their temples, statues, relics, stelae, toward the volcano, not away. To show respect. To ask mercy. To say, we didn't forget you. It's a reverse evacuation. A spiritual offering instead of escape. You let that one sit with you as you visit the Lava Dome Museum. It's half science lab, half memorial. The walls show seismic charts. The floor holds fragments of destroyed villages. There's a clock stuck at the moment pyroclastic flow hit a particular chapel. And yet, visitors leave flowers there, too. You talk to a volcanologist who's also a practicing Hindu. He tells you, straight-faced, the volcano has a pattern. But it doesn't follow logic. It follows memory. And now your head spins. You step outside and look back toward Merapi. It's smoking today, slightly more than usual. The sky behind it glows amber, clouds curling like muscle. You remember the alignment lines, the temples, the angles carved into buried stone. And you realize the truth. It was never about building away from danger. It was about building with it. Around it. Because here, destruction isn't the end. It's the next version of devotion. The ash becomes soil. The ruin becomes foundation. The temple cracks, and then the people reassemble it, slightly different, slightly stronger. Like a ritual. Like a vow. You take a deep breath. Ash and sunlight. Destruction and faith. Welcome to the sacred rhythm of Java. By now, your feet know the rhythm. Stone, dust, root, grass. You no longer think about where you're going, you just follow the pull. And today, it pulls you along a path whispered to be older than any single temple. A path traced not by rulers or scholars, but by the worn sandals of countless pilgrims. A journey between shrines and summits. A sacred migration. You're walking the old way. The Jala Ziara, the pilgrimage route. No signs mark it. No fences protect it. But if you ask the right people, and squint at just the right angle between temple stones and terraced fields, you'll see the route emerge like an afterimage. Borobudur to Mendit to Gunung Wooker, then beyond, toward Prambanan. And in between, always, the volcanoes, Merapi, Merbabu, Sumbing, silent guardians along the trail. You pass a farmer carrying offerings in a bamboo basket. Palm leaf, rice grains, a cigarette for the spirits. He nods at you and points up the trail. Terasaya. Dulu Banyak Jalan Kaki. Just keep going. People used to walk this way all the time. You walk. The sun rises higher, baking your neck, but still you walk. Through fields, past shrines barely knee-high, stones worn to near invisibility. You think of the countless anonymous feet that have shaped this trail. Some walked for penance. Some for blessings. Some because the mountain called. Historians still debate whether this route was ever formalized, or whether it evolved organically, drawn by instinct, by dream, by volcanic logic. The paths aren't straight. They curve gently around ridges, follow the lines of old lava flows. And that's when it hits you, maybe they had to. Because those who first walked this route weren't avoiding the volcano. They were reading it, following its moods, its breath. You come across a stone marker, half buried in vines. It's not a grave, but something close, a rest point. A place to stop, to listen. The inscription's unreadable, but someone's left incense. It's still smoldering. You sit and inhale. Charcoal, jasmine, the faintest trace of volcanic soil. Even the air here remembers. You press on. Past Candy Kunsen, a tiny temple wedged between banana trees, almost absurd in its modesty. It faces east, but its side wall bears scorch marks, as if fire once licked it and thought better of burning it down. Locals say this was one of the last stops before reaching Merapi, the place where pilgrims pause to ask permission. Here's the quirky part, some villages along the route still reenact these walks. Not for show. For real. Each year, around the full moon of Wesak, entire communities walk barefoot from Mendit to Borobudur before sunrise. It's a long, dusty trek, but they say the mountain grants wishes to those who arrive in silence. You hike the last stretch toward the foot of Merapi, where the forest thins and the rocks grow darker. There's no final temple here. Just a stream. Clear, cold, and fast. It flows down from the peak, across volcanic boulders and into the valley. You kneel and cup the water. It's shockingly cold. Alive. A young man beside you splashes his face and says, simply, Air Susi. Holy water. No sermon. No gate. Just mountain in motion. You realize something. This path wasn't designed. It was remembered. Every footstep adds to the memory. Every visit reactivates the geometry. The volcano is not just the endpoint, it's the altar. And the route itself is the prayer. You watch a group arrive. Some carry nothing. One carries a photo. Another, a flower. No one speaks. They step into the stream, bow, and walk back down. You stay a little longer. And in that silence, surrounded by stone and smoke, you understand why the temples align. Not just because of where the volcano is, but because of where you need to go. The temples don't point. They invite. The path down is steeper than you remember. Your knees protest. Your water bottle's warm. And the volcano behind you? Still there. Watching like it never left, because, well, it never does. But this next stretch of your journey flips the script. Because now, you're not chasing temples that face the volcano. You're exploring the idea that volcanoes themselves are more than just scenery, they're the gatekeepers. Not metaphors. Not poetic devices. Literal entrances to other realms. Spiritual doorways in geological drag. Sounds dramatic? Of course it does. But in Javanese cosmology, the volcano is not just a feature of the land. It's a boundary. A hinge. A breathing, unpredictable threshold between worlds. You're on your way to a village near Mount Lau, a quieter volcano that's long been considered mystical, even by volcano standards. Unlike Merapi's hot-tempered reputation, Lau is the mountain of silence. Of withdrawal. Where kings go to disappear. Where mystics climb and, sometimes, don't come back down. And nestled on its slope, like an idea half buried in a dream, is Kandy-suku. You climb narrow roads through pine forest. Yes, pine, not jungle, and the air chills enough to make you zip up. The temple appears suddenly. No fanfare. Just stone steps and a perimeter wall that doesn't even try to contain what's inside. You walk in, and immediately realize this place is different. Forget symmetry. Forget polish. Kandy-suku is raw. Almost confrontational. Stone carvings depict humans in, let's say, energetic poses. Fertility symbols, snakes, headless figures. A pyramid-shaped shrine that looks more Mayan than Javanese. It's bold, unapologetic, and weird in the best possible way. Historians still argue whether Kandy-suku was a late Hindu temple or something entirely unique, an offshoot of indigenous practices given free rein in the remote shadow of Lau. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear, this isn't a temple built to worship a volcano. It's a temple built to enter one. You stand in front of the main structure, a truncated pyramid, with steps leading up and a narrow chamber behind. The carvings show a procession of figures moving inward, flanked by guardians. This is not architecture. It's choreography. A symbolic passage. From life to death. From outer to inner. From the world you know, to the one waiting behind the smoke. Here's a local belief, still whispered around campfires and roadside stalls. Mount Lau is a Jurbang Arwa, a gate of souls. When someone dies unprepared, their spirit gets stuck wandering. But those who ascend Lau with intention, with ritual, with prayer, they pass through. Cleanly. Fully. The volcano opens for them. You hike a bit higher, toward a place called Semirosolu. There's no temple here, just trailheads and mist. But people still climb. Even now. Not to conquer, To connect, they bring offerings. They sleep under the stars. And some, they say, hear voices in the wind, names, songs, whispers too soft for skeptics. You sit on a mossy rock and let your breath match the cold air. The forest pulses with quiet. And suddenly, the theory makes sense. The mountain isn't just landscape. It's language. Not every volcano screams. Some murmur. A quirky tale from a local porter. There's a spot halfway up Law called Pazer Seaton, the Devil's Market. Travelers claim they hear crowds there at night. Sellers shouting. Bells ringing. But there's no one. Just fog. And if you respond, if you answer or try to buy something invisible, you might not come back. Charming, right? But the real point is this: the volcano tests you. Not with lava, with mystery. And that's what Kandy-suku is all about. Not honoring the mountain. Entering it. Accepting it. Letting it open a door you didn't know you were knocking on. You head back down, the temple slowly disappearing behind trees and clouds. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like you're leaving sacred ground. It feels like it left a mark on you. You head back west now, riding shotgun in a borrowed motorbike that rattles like a loose tambourine and smells faintly of gasoline and clove. The wind cuts past your ears, sticky with humidity and occasional whiffs of grilled corn. And in your backpack, scribbled across 3 notebooks, you've got notes, maps, temple sketches, and one recurring question that won't shut up. Who figured all this out? Because let's be real, aligning giant stone temples with mountains miles away isn't something you pull off with a hunch and a prayer. Someone had to plan it. Someone had to see the stars, feel the wind, trace the sun's path, and say, yep, right here. Build it right here. Face it exactly that way. Which brings you to your next destination, not a temple, but an idea. The astronomer priest. You arrive at a quiet village nestled in the hills near Kandy-Callison. It's mostly chickens, beetle-chewing grannies, and an old observatory tower overgrown with vines. The tower isn't ancient, but the site is, and the story's here? Very old. The locals say this hill was once home to Pendeta Langat, sky priests. Men and women who observed the heavens not for calendars or crops, but for messages. From gods. From volcanoes. From both. You climb the hill and sit in the clearing where the tower stands, looking out toward Merapi, which, as always, is right there, smug and steaming. You imagine someone, centuries ago, standing here night after night, charting stars with nothing but bamboo instruments and bone-deep patience, trying to understand not just where to build, but when. Historians still argue whether these priests were formally trained or spiritual intuitives. Some suggest they were mathematicians cloaked in myth, others say they were mediums guided by dreams. The truth is probably both. Because here in Java, science and spirit have always shared a smoke break. And it makes sense. The Javanese didn't compartmentalize the cosmos. They didn't say this is religion and that's astronomy. They said, if the volcano erupts during a full moon, build on the third ridge. If the star Bathara Guru rises above the eastern peak, begin the foundation. If the wind shifts, wait. These priests didn't just chart constellations. They read the volcanoes. Like books. Like beings. You hear a local tale, one of those delicious oral histories half lost in the folds of time, about a priest named Rakaiwala, who predicted Merapi's eruption by watching the patterns of flame beetles. They flew differently, he claimed, when the mountain was preparing to speak. So he advised the king to shift the temple plans 6 meters west. And sure enough, when Merapi blew a year later, the lava missed the temple by, wait for it, 7 meters. Fringe? Maybe. But those temples are still standing. Here's the quirky detail. Some of these sky priests supposedly created portable star maps using copper bowls filled with water. The reflection of the sky on the water helped them track movements. A kind of analog telescope made from soup. Genius. You visit a small museum nearby and find a cracked stone slab with faint markings, directions, degrees, maybe prayers. No one knows for sure. But the alignment? Points dead on to Merapi. You imagine these astronomer priests traveling the island, barefoot and sun-wrinkled, stopping at ridges, hills, and riverbanks, planting bamboo sticks, measuring shadows, listening to dreams. And when they found the right place, they didn't shout. They whispered. And the builders got to work. And suddenly, all those alignments make sense. Not as accidents. Not as architectural flourishes. as instructions, left behind by people who looked up, looked inward, and built outward. You watch the sun begin to drop behind a curtain of haze. The air hums with crickets and the occasional clang of a rice mill. And far off, Merapi smokes just a little more, as if approving your curiosity. You sit in that fading light and think, maybe the priests didn't need equations or blueprints. Maybe they just needed time, patience, and a willingness to listen to both the stars and the fire. And maybe, when the sky and volcano agreed, that's when they built. Night falls again, and this time you don't retreat to a guest house or the safety of mosquito nets. You're in a small hut near the base of Merapi, at the invitation of a local family who's been living in its shadow for generations. The air is thick with wood smoke and chilly, and the walls tremble gently whenever a distant rumble rolls through the mountain. Nobody flinches. This is normal. After dinner, spicy tempeh, rice, and a glass of hot ginger tea, you're led by candlelight to a nearby ridge. No streetlights, no noise. Just darkness, stars, and the heartbeat of the earth. And then, you hear it. Not the rumble. That's easy to recognize. It's the sound of the ash. Soft, whispery, like sand shifting in a dream. A dry hiss carried on the wind from the slopes of Merapi. It's not loud, not even scary, but it's unmistakable. You crouch low, hand on the ground. The earth feels warm, not just from the air, but from within. And above you, the stars do their slow dance, ancient and patient. You're here to understand how sound and ceremony once met, how temples used to respond to eruptions, not just visually, but musically. Because yes, temples were built to hear the mountain too. You walk to a nearby shrine, just a few meters of stacked stone, with no fancy carvings or historical signage. But next to it sits a bell. A real one. Heavy bronze, pockmarked with time. Still intact. And here's the kicker, this bell is designed to ring when the wind carries certain frequencies. Low sounds, subsonic tremors, trigger a faint hum in its hollow. The locals don't use it often. It's not for humans. It's for balance. You sit beside it, and in the silence, you hear a faint vibration. Almost imagined. Almost not. Historians still argue whether these bells were designed as alert systems or spiritual harmonizers. Were they meant to warn villagers? Or did they serve as prayers in reverse, a song to soothe the restless mountain? Either way, it's brilliant. And it wasn't just bells. Some temples had cavities carved into their inner chambers, designed to amplify sound during ceremonies. You remember Candy Mended, where the acoustics made a single chant bounce like thunder. Imagine chanting there during an eruption. Voice and volcano, echoing each other. Here's your quirky bit. In one village, an old gamelan said, those traditional Javanese instruments of bronze and wood, was once used to mimic the rhythm of volcanic tremors. Not to mock, to match, to harmonize. The belief was that if you could play the mountain's rhythm, it might feel heard. And calm down. You wonder, sitting here in the dark, if Merapi remembers those songs. The elder with you lights a stick of incense and offers it wordlessly toward the peak. No chanting. No drama. Just a gesture. A note in an unspoken score. And for a moment, the wind shifts. You hear the hiss of ash change pitch. The bell quivers. And for the tiniest moment, the volcano and the shrine seem to be speaking. You close your eyes. You don't know the language, but you know this is a conversation. And that's the point. The temples weren't just shelters or altars or monuments. They were instruments. Each aligned not just to sight, but to sound. Built to face. Built to echo. Built to sing. You head back to the hut under a sky so thick with stars it feels like silk. And Merapi? Still smoldering. Still humming. You crawl under your blanket, eyes wide open. Tonight, the mountain has the melody. But you, finally, can hear the harmony. Morning creeps in without permission, soft, gold-fingered, and suspiciously early. You wake up with ash in your hair, a faint ring of sleep lines on your cheek, and a brain buzzing with half-dreams of singing mountains and whispering stone. But no time to linger. Because today, you climb higher. Not on foot, this time. You've hitched a ride with a drone operator. He's here for footage. You're here for perspective. As you climb into his battered pickup, rattling with camera gear and spare propellers, you try to explain what you've been tracking, the alignments, the axes, the eerie temple volcano choreography that seems far too intentional to be accidental. He just nods, says, "Yeah, man." From the air, it's real obvious. And he's right. You launch from a ridge just east of Prambanan. The drone zips up, whining like a mosquito with ambition, and your screen lights up with live feed. At first, it's just the temple. Then the surrounding fields. Then, boom, the whole pattern. There they are. Borobudur, Mendit, Pawan, Kalasan, Sambasari, Prambanan, Kandiijo, Rataboko. Each one like a chess piece scattered across the board of central Java. But here's the kicker, they're not scattered. They form lines. Not just one, but multiple. Intersecting diagonals. Curved paths that trace the spines of long-cooled lava flows. Triangles, spirals, even what looks suspiciously like a mandala, if you squint. You nearly drop the controller. Historians still argue whether this pattern is architectural, symbolic, or just a cartographic hallucination caused by confirmation bias. But standing here on this ridge, watching those sacred stones connect like stars in a forgotten constellation, you believe it. You turn the drone toward Merapi. It dominates the horizon, a gray-blue colossus wrapped in lazy cloud. The drone gets closer, and the screen flickers with heat shimmer. At the base, you see new temples being built. Modern ones. Still aligned. Still facing the same ancient presence. You zoom out again, and it's breathtaking. From up here, you see it all, the sacred lines, the temple compass, the geography of devotion. The way every site leans toward the mountains like sunflowers to light. And it hits you, not just how smart these ancient architects were, but how humble. They didn't build for ego. They built in relationship. With earth. With sky. With fire. Here's a fringe theory your drone buddy casually throws at you over a breakfast of instant noodles. Some folks think the temples weren't just aligned for volcanoes, they were built as resonators. Like a tuning system. When everything's lined up right, the land vibrates at a different frequency. Healing stuff. You know? You don't laugh. Because weirdly, it tracks. You review the footage. Rewind. Pause. Zoom. In one frame, the sun casts long warning shadows across the temple courtyards. The shadows stretch perfectly along the axis pointing to Merapi. In another, you catch the glint of sunlight bouncing from a stupa at Borobudur toward the foothills of Sumbing. It's like the land is reflecting itself. You fly the drone higher, farther, until it's hovering between temple and volcano, like an unblinking third eye. And for the first time, you don't feel like a tourist. You feel like part of the circuit. Part of the map. Part of the alignment. The drone battery dies just as the clouds roll in, swallowing Merapi in soft white silence. You pack up, heart oddly full. Because now you know. It's all connected. Not just in stone or story, but in sight. In intention. In the quiet, persistent human longing to look up, reach out, and build something that lasts beyond ash. You're back on foot again, tracing a narrow path through tall grass that bends in the breeze like it's tired from centuries of watching humans pretend we're the ones in control. The path leads nowhere specific, just forward. And maybe that's the point. Because here you are, at the end of your journey, yet surrounded by everything you've seen. Every alignment. Every temple. Every breath of ash and syllable of prayer. The volcano looms ahead, still smoking, still sovereign. Merapi, your companion, your landmark, your riddle. Behind you, stone towers rise and fall in your memory, linked not just by distance, but by a kind of sacred thread you can't see but feel everywhere now. You climb one last ridge, just high enough to sit and see everything at once. Borobudur to the west, its terraces faint but resolute in the morning haze. Prambanan to the east, its spires sharp and defiant. Between them, valleys breathe and shimmer, dotted with shrines, villages, and shadows of places that haven't been rediscovered yet. You think about the builders. Not the kings or the architects whose names made it into stone inscriptions. The others. The hands that hauled lava rock. The minds that knelt in fields and measured sunrise angles with bamboo sticks and guesswork laced with hope. The priests who closed their eyes and listened for the pulse of the land. The women who brought offerings. The farmers who kept the trails clear. The children who grew up in the shadows of temples never realizing they lived inside a map. You wonder if they knew what they were doing would last this long. You think they did. Here's your final quirky fact. In some Javanese villages, when a baby is born, the placenta is buried facing the family's nearest volcano. Not for health, for connection. So the child always knows where home is. Because here, volcanoes aren't just mountains. They're ancestors. And temples? They're not just monuments. They're letters. Sent across time and ash. Meant to be read by those willing to walk the line. You lie back in the grass and close your eyes. The wind brushes past, carrying the scent of stone warmed by sunlight and the faint sting of clove. Somewhere below, a temple bell chimes, soft, distant, maybe even imagined. The alignment is complete. You've followed the angles. Listen to the echoes. Walk through memories stitched into the land. And now it's quiet. Let it stay that way. Let your breath settle now. You've walked far, through rice fields and relics, through mountain breath and temple bones. You've seen how the ancients thought not in terms of ownership, but relationship. How they built not to conquer nature, but to converse with it. How each stone, each shadow, each sunrise held meaning, not just to the gods, but to the ground itself. You stood where kings once knelt, watched where volcanoes once screamed, heard the faint hum of bells and ash in memory. Let that stay with you. Let it settle like dusk on the slope of Merapi, soft and full of promise. Let it remind you that sacred doesn't mean perfect, it means present. Fully, quietly, unshakably. The temples remain. The volcanoes still breathe. And maybe now, after this long slow walk through the heart of Java, you can breathe a little deeper too. Because alignment isn't about being exact. It's about paying attention to where you are, to what came before, and to the smoke on the horizon that always says, gently, remember me. Now close your eyes. Let the world fall back behind you. Let the wind play with your hair like you're something holy. Let the silence stretch just a little longer. Sweet dreams.